often hard as we walk to see things. You know, Quong Tart's tea rooms in King Street doesn't exist anymore. The building's not even there. We have a photo of its facade, but the building no longer exists.
At 137 King Street, Sydney, you'll find the driveway to an underground car park wedged between two shops. You would never guess that this site was once at the heart of significant social change. In the late 19th century, this was the location of Quong Tart's Lung Shan tea rooms. Here, some remarkable individuals were challenging the notion that public life and the political sphere were the exclusive domain of white men.
Quong Tart was a really interesting man. He had great, I guess, entrepreneurship, and he saw a real market for Chinese tea. And then he also saw a market for actually not only selling the tea, but also providing tea rooms and encouraging people to gather and enjoy his tea, and therefore create even more of a market.
City historian Dr. Lisa Murray steps us inside Quong Tart's King Street tea rooms.
Quong Tart invested a lot in his tea rooms and ensured the fittings were of a high quality and standard, just like his tea. And so the photographs that survive are not of his King Street tea rooms so much. We have an external of that, but later on he also had tea rooms in the Queen Victoria Market building, which is still there today, the QVB. And the tea rooms there, upstairs, the dining rooms, had beautiful bentwood chairs, lovely napery, very fine porcelain. Some examples of his porcelain that he served at the tea room survive. Obviously, he played up his Chinese background and the Chinese importation of his tea. So the porcelain was all in sort of Chinese chinoiserie designs that were very much of the era and very, very popular. The type of food that he was providing in his tea rooms was very much of the sort of English style of high tea, and then sort of the standard meals in many ways that you would find in other restaurants, grills and tea rooms. So there would be sandwiches, there would be probably steak and kidney pie, there would be sort of a range of hot and cold meals, plenty of tea, hot tea available, of course, not other alcoholic drinks. His was definitely more tea rooms, particularly during the day. But it was very much, I guess, a sort of English fare. He certainly wasn't offering chow mein or beef and black bean sauce for people to eat. Well, it's a very gendered city in the late 19th century, and women had a very certain place. They were seen to be very much a strong part of the family unit. They were important for running the whole household at home. If you were an upper class lady, you would also have a number of servants who would help you to actually run the household. But women weren't seen as, it wasn't seen to be appropriate necessarily for women to be out there being lawyers and doctors, and they're really breaking through in the late 19th century and pushing the boundaries of where they want to be. Women's college is being established at Sydney University so that women can try and get an education at tertiary level. There is a very big push for women to have a say in politics, to have a say in business, to have a say and be who they want to be. So it's a really interesting time in the late 19th century in Sydney. Women are drawing on the growing wealth of Australia, and women in upper class positions are seeing they're educated and they have political views and they want to be a part of those discussions. So I guess they're really pushing the boundaries. And what this means for Sydney in terms of where women can be is that they can be seen in public during the day, but they should be seen in groups. Going out at night, generally you'd want a chaperone of some sort, or to be with your husband, or so on. If you were seen on the streets at night by yourself as a woman, you were probably a working class woman, and you'd be often, depending on where you were, you could be accused of being a street walker, a prostitute. So there were very clear class boundaries of where you could be seen and not seen. But there weren't even public toilets for women on the streets in the late 19th century. It really wasn't a place for women to be just seen around, hanging around in the streets and parks. That wasn't seen as an appropriate place for women. I think that Quong Tart saw a business opportunity. He would have seen that women were coming to his to the tea rooms for lunch, and probably saw that there was an opportunity for another space for women. What Quong Tart offered with his reading room upstairs at his tea rooms was an opportunity for women to come and utilize the space, and I guess meet in slightly less formal surroundings, maybe not to have a full meal, but certainly to have cups of tea and to have meetings and have discussions. This was really an astute move on Quong Tart's part. So the tea room was operating downstairs on the street level, so there would have been in the tea rooms, there would have been a counter for people to purchase tea and that sort of thing, an area where people could go and sit down and have luncheon, and then there was probably stairs leading upstairs to allow women to go to the reading room, where they could also take tea, but could have more formal meetings without disturbing the other diners downstairs. So it was very much a discrete, separate place. And these opportunities for women to meet, and the Women's Literary Society in some ways started out a bit like a book club that we all have today, and there's lots of heated discussion and debate, and things move from an issue that might be in literature to issues of the day. And it's from, I guess, the Women's Literary Society that then the Womanhood for Suffrage League evolves from, and that in turn really pushes their interest is really pushing for representation in politics and parliament, and giving women the right to vote. So it's a very exciting time, and these are women who are really well connected. Then all of the founders of the Womanhood Suffrage League of New South Wales were all connected into Sydney society. They had money behind them. They were the daughters and wives of judges and also sort of mining magnates and businessmen. These were women who had the opportunity for education, the opportunity for leisure, the opportunity to indulge in charity works. And so they weren't just members of the Womanhood Suffrage League, they were also members of many other important organisations that supported society. You're going to find a woman from the Suffrage League on another committee somewhere else, because they're engaged women. They're women who care about their community, and they see they've got an opportunity to make a difference and make a change. So these women, like Maybank Anderson, are really important in the late 19th century. They actually set the agenda for the 20th century. They are the ones who are caring about all classes of women, not just not just where they're from, the upper crust, and making their lives better. They're interested in making lives better for working class women. They're caring about their conditions and their opportunities. Well, it's really interesting actually, because it was certainly started off by middle and upper class women. But what is interesting is that a number of inner city areas had branches, and these were sort of suburbs which we would class in the late 19th century and early 20th century as being working class suburbs. Yes, there would have been some middle class people living in them, but they were certainly working class. So there's a Redfern branch. There's a Camperdown branch of the Womanhood Suffrage League. There's one in Newtown. There's one in Glebe. These are working class areas. So it is interesting that they are clearly trying to spread the word amongst women more broadly. And I guess that in some ways made the Womanhood Suffrage League perhaps slightly different to the National Council of Women, which was a bit more kind of upper class, although they still had many ideals, that not only ideals but also agendas which were for all women. And it was people like Maybank Anderson and people like Rose Scott, people like Louisa Lawson, who really set the agenda and set the tone for the debate that was to happen with federation coming and I guess a Commonwealth for voting. Women were trying to find a place in their own states, in what were then separate colonies. So federation was a very difficult issue. Some women had already got the vote. South Australia had already got the vote before Australia federated in 1901. So it was very difficult for women to work out what to do. It was hard enough to get Australia federated, then all these other groups who had their own agendas, how do they come together and find a national voice? I do know that Quong Tart certainly hosted some banquets for things like the kindergarten union, free kindergarten movement. So I would imagine that Quong Tart would have had some dealings with people like Maybank Anderson in that sort of charity role. He was a big philanthropist and very supportive of many of Sydney's charities. And so I think he would have crossed paths with a number of women. He's a really interesting person. I mean, he grew up on the southern goldfields of New South Wales. He was adopted by a Scottish family. So there's really funny caricatures of Quong Tart in the late 19th century, sporting a tartan kilt and playing the bagpipes and sort of doing a Highland jig. He was known to pull out the bagpipe from time to time and to break out into Scottish brogue, to bring people on side and to kind of show his duality as both a Chinaman but also very much brought up in the English or Scottish ways here in colonial New South Wales. But he was identified as sort of a leader within the Chinese community, and he was certainly wanting to represent Chinese people here in Sydney, and he often got involved in parliamentary inquiries that were associated with Chinese people in Sydney, and tried to be, I guess, a middleman in a way. But you can see from some of the representations of him in caricatures and things that there is a bit of there's backhanded comments and that undercurrent of racism, which was still very much a part of Sydney, and some would say still is today, is still present today, this undercurrent of racism, which is a nasty part of Australian culture. It's hard for people, I think, when they're wandering around Sydney today to try and see Sydney as a different place. We have, as women, we have been very much supported by the work of people like Maybank Anderson and Rose Scott and Louisa Lawson, and people like Mary Windeyer. We couldn't work and live in Sydney today without the work that they did over 100 years ago. So one of the things we have done at the City of Sydney is we teamed up with the Jessie Street Women's Library, National Women's Library, and we together created a I guess like almost like a ghost walking tour called Skirting Sydney, and it's all about, I guess, highlighting the places like Quong Tart's tea rooms in King Street, where women met, where women discussed ideas, where women made a difference through their political organisation, through their societies, through their publications, and really created Sydney as we know it today.